Please welcome Professor David Marsh, the Content and Language Integrated Learning developer, who will explain the evidence-based value of quality bilingual education.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you to the Richmond crew for making this easy and possible. And thank you, the person who is watching this, wherever you are, and whatever time of day it is when you see it. It's a joy to be able to speak with you, and perhaps another day we'll be able to speak together in a different situation. The talk today is called Realizing the Full Potential of Students in Bilingual Classes. And before we start, I just want to say a little bit about what I had planned to do. I had wanted to tell you a story. The story starts with the global changes in education that are happening at the moment in respect to what we call bilingual schools, the hunger for quality bilingual education, which we can see from parents, from teachers, from students, from school leaders, what bilingual education school is and what it is not, to try and make a difference between those. And then we're going to look at some evidence of quality bilingual education and the added value that this can bring to the children, to the young people, and indeed to the families who attend our schools. And then we're going to wrap up with a brief part on how it's actually done. The story of modern bilingual education in the world at the moment was actually born in Canada during a crisis in the 1970s. It was a political crisis between people who spoke English and who spoke French, and educators and politicians and school leaders. They looked out for a solution, and they created something called immersion. In the 1980s, the European Union had a crisis to do with monolingualism in all the different countries. In other words, young people were not learning well enough the languages of their neighbors and so on. The English were not learning French, the French were not learning German, the Spanish were not learning Portuguese, and so on. And then in Asia, around 2000, there was another crisis which related to the fact that Asian education seemed to be pushing young people too hard for too long. And one of the competencies which was particularly lacking across Japan, Korea, Singapore was language ability. And that produced a crisis which also made the world focus on bilingual education and the methodologies of bilingual education. So the story goes back actually a long time, but now I want to just talk a little bit about what's been happening yesterday in our schools and how we can learn from what was happening yesterday in order to understand how best to run a school, how best to be a teacher in a school, in a bilingual class, and so forth. Very briefly, in the old days, subject teaching was fragmented: physics, chemistry, geography, English. In the old days, language teaching was fragmented. Language teaching, learning English in Colombia, learning English in Brazil, learning English in Uruguay, it was as a separate subject. In the old days, people learned English by focusing on grammar and words. Here is an example from a textbook which is only 3 years old. The letter has just been typed. Who types letters these days? I have no idea. New cars have been invented. Look how exciting and exhilarating those two quotes were in a textbook. That was yesterday how we learned languages. And in the old days, competencies, the can-do was ignored, or it was somehow separated so that children who are bright are academic and they go to high school, they go to university. Children who are not very bright they do learn some sort of vocational competence-based training and so on. But now, what is happening is that leading schools across the world are bringing these all together. They're bringing language, content, and competence together. Some of these schools are international schools. Some of these schools are public sector schools, which are working towards producing a curriculum, a learning experience where two languages are used for different purposes. And many of these are private schools. Why more private schools? Because private schools tend to have more autonomy, more freedom to move faster, and more access to what people really want and ability to respond to that. Yesterday's schools were thinking in a monolingual way, the public and the private. Yesterday's schools had a limited curricular, international curricular focus. Subject teaching was all fragmented, and language was taught through grammar-based approaches, and learning goals were not aligned to international and competencies. Great, let's turn to today. Today, after 30 years of a lot of talk, we are seeing a major reshaping of education. Actually, people have known how to teach very young children, adolescent children, young adults for hundreds of years. But to actually see that in action in our schools has taken a long time. We have had a crisis. We've had a crisis which has been global, something that has been shared by school leaders, by school owners, by teachers right across the world. And that has led, as crises often do, to, okay, surely we can do better. How are we going to change? And so these changes are actually happening very, very fast at this moment globally. My work is in the Middle East, it's in Asia, and it's in South America, and the same thing is happening through the private sector in international schools and also in bilingual schools for a lot of reasons. The hunger for English, the demand for English has been and continues to be very strong among certain types of the societies right across the region here in South America and across Asia. But there's something else happening, and that is we have parents aged between, let's say, 25, 35, 40 years old when they have a child. They still remember that their early education or their education may not have been as good as it could have been, and they want something for their children. And that is driving a market sector which is absolutely essential. Bilingual schools are not required to teach half the curriculum in, for example, Spanish, and half in another language like English. A bilingual school is a school where two languages are used through the curriculum and for learning. So it could be grade 1, it's 80% Spanish, it's 20% English. Grade 5, it's 60% Spanish, 40% English, and so on. There's a blend. The blend depends on where we are and what we want and who the children are, who the parents are, and so on. But essentially, bilingual schools work through a multilingual paradigm that is very different to a monolingual paradigm. They embed an international focus into the curriculum. They partly integrate the subject teaching. They integrate the language teaching with genuine content, and they align what they're teaching to global competencies. Now, I'm not going to start talking about cooking, but I am going to start talking about two big things happening in international and bilingual schools across the world. The first one is called EMI. EMI is English as the medium of instruction. When a school in Thailand, in Bulgaria, in Bolivia, wants to internationalize the curriculum. One thing they do is to look for importing a foreign provider of a curriculum plus materials, which is fine if the materials are good. But the other thing is to think that the only good teachers to teach in my school, to teach through English in my school, have to be native speakers from Alabama, from Australia, from New Zealand, or from the United Kingdom, and so on. And EMI is where you bring in a teacher, often who does not know the language of the students in the class, who speaks in English, but who is possibly even a monolingual person themselves, and who, crucially, they don't change their methodology. The methodology they're using, even if it's good, is the same that they use in Birmingham, Alabama, Birmingham, UK, and it is not suitable for a context, for example, in Mexico, in Colombia, in Argentina, where Spanish-speaking, or in Brazil, Portuguese-speaking young people are trying to successfully learn through English. So EMI is the most common approach which you'll find in bilingual schools, and it is the worst. And it's a little bit like chili, a small amount of it can be very useful, but too much at too short a time, and some of us get indigestion. The second approach, which has become known as content and language integrated learning, you can think of it as integrated learning. CLIL has become a signature pedagogy right across the world. Born around 1994, it is now found in the most successful bilingual education schools globally, and we're going to talk a little bit about that later. All right, well, thank you for staying with me so far. Things are looking good. And now we're going to proceed by having a talk about some evidence to do with what happens when young people use more than one language, because this is critical information for any educator, any school manager, or anybody planning to run a school which can be truly called a bilingual school, a school which truly realizes the potential of young people in relation to more than one language. Those schools exist, and those schools are proud to exist, and those schools can be seen when they are good, but they are different to the world which is claiming that we have bilingual education, but we don't actually have it. Neuroscience has had a bad press, partly because about 25 years ago, it was very popular to say, here's some research from the brain. If you drink water at 7 o'clock in the morning, or if you drink tea at 9 o'clock in the evening, this will happen. If you take this food, this will happen, and so on. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about something which is very specific in relation to education and to languages and to bilingual education. So hold with me for some 10 minutes, and we're going to run through this research, which I've been very proud to have been associated with. What's happening now in this year is that research and insight, of people who do things, which is often very good, over some 400 years, is meeting the latest neuroscience research over the last 20 years. Research inside the brain is meeting former research outside the brain. And there is evidence that people who use more than one language have advantages over monolinguals. And I stress the word use because it's not people who know another language. I know French. I have learned French for 11 years. But when I left school, I could hardly communicate in French. I know French when I left school, but I could not use French. people who use more than one language fairly regularly, which is something you can achieve in a bilingual school, have advantages over those who don't. It's not the kind of, whoa, eureka, we have the evidence, because that often doesn't happen in research with important things. But there are powerful indicators of 6 advantages. And a key message from this research is that the key message is about why we teach languages, why, for example, a bilingual school in Uruguay, in Bolivia, is actually providing much more to the young person, to the student, than just extra ability to use another language like English. And it is also about how we learn languages. I have never seen in my professional career anything as exciting as this research in respect to language learning. And if I tell you the story very briefly, around 2010, the European Commission wanted to know, is there a relationship between knowing more than one language and creativity? Is there an added value to knowing more than one language other than being able to communicate with people in that language? And I headed that study with a big team, including people from Latin America. And we looked at some 4,000 different research studies, and we did what we call a meta-study. So first of all, we had researchers and academics from different disciplines, from psychology, actually psychiatry, neuroscience, education. And they said, look at these 4,000. Which of these are so strong that we have to really look at them? And then what do we have now that we've found the top 500? What do they say? Do they say different things, or do they say much the same thing? And the answer is they said much the same thing. Very briefly, before I show you the results of that research, I want to remind you that language teaching has been affected by, I could say no more than bad attitudes for a very long period of time. It has been a myth that language learning is difficult and is only for high-achieving students. That is not true. If you teach language badly to students, it's going to be true. But it is not true that only the brightest young people are those who can really cope with learning another language. Languages have been linked to power for many, many generations in many different continents, and certain parts of the society have been given access to language learning in order to generate power, influence, and certain parts of the society have been excluded from language learning. Now, this is not the time to go into this, but behind all of us who are thinking about what is a good bilingual class, what is a good bilingual school, what is a good language teacher, what is a good bilingual education teacher, we have to shake off the myths and the dark clouds. We have to shake off the assumptions that people have had about language learning and language teaching and realize that it's history. For example, 1923, a very significant study in the Journal of Psychology in the United Kingdom, which claimed very clearly how bad it is to know more than one language. And actually, if you go to the North America now, you'll find similar arguments being made in some states, for example, of the United States of America. So language is not like physics, it's not like geography. Language carries some powerful stuff and powerful emotions and so on. And it's something that we have to bear in mind if we're going to play with language in our school, because it's like playing with fire. Done well, it's wonderful. If I had children being born now I would have them in a bilingual school with absolutely no doubt, because I know what those benefits are. So actually, the situation that we have is a very exciting one. But one of the key issues is to communicate to the parents, to other stakeholders, as to when is a bilingual class good and when is it not good. I'm going to try now and simplify this very clearly. There are two ways to learn a language. You can learn through a language. That's the natural way. It's like the same way we learned our first language. Or you can learn about a language. That's the unnatural way, and it's what we call traditional language teaching. If you learn through a language, the two languages actually are in the same place, if you like, in the brain. The two languages create one thinking system, all right? They complement each other. If you learn about a language, so if you learn 1,000 words in English and all the grammar of English, but you can't think in English because you've never been given the opportunity, those languages are separated in the brain. Some of you will know what I mean when you think, I have to now think in another language. You know, I have to now think in Spanish. I have to now think in English. Young people in bilingual schools who have, and it doesn't have to be a lot, who have a continuous opportunity to think in another language have this wonderful advantage over those who do not. If you look at the brain of, on the left-hand side of a child who has had perhaps a mother speaking German and a father speaking Spanish, and has been brought up with two languages from a very early age, you'll see what I just said, the two languages overlap. If you take an adolescent who starts to learn language at a later date, you'll see that they are much more separated. And if you start learning another language as an adult, they are very separated. What we are doing in a bilingual school is we are replicating that wonderful advantage which the child had with the German and the Spanish parent. We're actually able to enable the cognitive advantage to be realized amongst in those students. Learning in an unnatural way, learning about language is the most common language teaching approach globally. It has a historical root. It relates to Latin, but I'll leave that with you for now. But actually, the way we teach languages, even in a highly sophisticated, advanced countries, is actually embedded in something that went wrong about 400 years ago. But that's another story for another time. Learning in a natural way, learning things through the language, is the signature pedagogy of really strong and powerful bilingual education in the world. I mentioned there learning real things in the language. So what is real? If I have lots of language teaching and we do communicative exercises, it's like if I take a toothbrush, what I'm saying to my students is, okay, here is a toothbrush. This is say toothbrush. Okay, now what you do with a toothbrush is that you do this, and you do it in the morning and you do it in the evening. Can you do it? Yes, we can do this in the morning and in the evening. That's learning about something. Okay, it's not learning through something. That is superficial learning. It's not deep learning. Deep learning is when you take the toothbrush, you take the toothpaste, you understand what's in this toothpaste, when, how often, in what way, why I shouldn't be swallowing it, and how I should learn that actually cleaning my teeth is going to be good for me and make me a happier person, and so on and so on and so on. Learning deep is different to learning superficial. And learning superficially is a very common weakness in our educational systems. And when we look at really good bilingual schools and we look at those methodologies which they have, we can see very exciting things happen. Now, to the advantages. a greater flexibility of the mind, a more adaptable mind. It's like a mind that has had, aerobics training, or a mind that has really managed to flexify itself compared to a mind which is solid. So ability to look at things through different perspectives. Ladies and gentlemen, people have been saying this for years. They've been saying, when I learn another language, it's like wearing a new pair of glasses. I see the world in a different way. What is important is that cutting edge neuroscience research from up to 2010 and from 2010 to 2020 is saying, yes, we have evidence that this happens. The second one is, I think, the most exciting. Well, they're all exciting, but the second one is perhaps the most exciting because the impact of using, for example, Spanish and English, 80%, 20% each week at school for different subjects, is to improve the short-term working memory. It's like there's a stimulus that goes on when I switch from learning about mountains or waterfalls or precipitation in Spanish, and then I'm learning about animals or something in English. That there's a stimulation there, which is also stimulating the short-term memory. And that means that the stimulation of switching languages is actually helping the child concentrate and helping them with deep thinking, no matter what language they're in. You can think of it as going to the gym, yeah? That actually my bilingual school is providing this extra energy, and it has this amazing capacity on the memory, which is a very complicated area. The next one is what we call the meta-linguistic mind. That's where you sort of stand above and you think about how you use language. It's very hard to think about how you use language if you only have one language. But when you have two languages, you learn from a very young age, actually, it's not just words, it's strategy. If I want to get an ice cream with my dad this afternoon, if he takes me out on my bike, maybe my strategy should be this. But the child would not have a range of different strategies if they didn't have the privilege of thinking in more than one language. Critical thinking is a key global competence for the OECD PISA, for us, for life. If you look at what has been happening recently politically in the world and the power of mass media, you can see that we need our populations to learn how to separate fact from fiction on a scale we've never seen before. The next one is perhaps obvious, but anyway, it's very important, and that is that the youngsters who are in the bilingual classes, they develop a capacity for empathy. They actually, it's not just I want to understand other people, but they actually develop strategies for understanding other people. Their people awareness skills become more sophisticated. This is not about language. Can you see that what we're talking about here are impacts on the mind and the brain and the people which go beyond the language? This is what we call the profound added value of the bilingual school. And it's something that because people don't know about it, they can't utilize it. And there are two ways of utilizing it. One is in how we describe what we're doing to the parents who are bringing their children to our school. And secondly, what we do in the classroom. Is it EMI? Is it the monolingual method? Or is it the integrated method? And so on. Coming to the end of these advantages, problem solving. If you give the monolinguals and the students from the bilingual schools simple problems, no difference. But if you give them a demanding problem, the bilinguals will outperform the monolinguals very, very fast. Finally, this is not related actually to our students, but this is one of those issues which has been in the media for at least 10 years and which is significant. Not perhaps something to be talking to our parents out in case they're sensitive about their age and so on and so on. But there is a link between a slowdown of neuropathological decline in those who know more than one language compared to those who know only one language of 4 years, which actually is very important for another audience, such as societies, such as hospitals, such as medics, and so on. Good. These are the advantages. Now, in 1629, somebody called John Comenius. Comenius is known as the father of modern education in Europe. In 1629, he published a book in multiple European languages called The Doors of Languages Unlocked. And at that time, he argued language cannot be taught without relation to content. Ladies and gentlemen, quite often now, what we're seeing is hours and hours and hours spent by young people learning languages without enough content. They may be learning toothbrush, this is the word for a toothbrush, but they're not learning why cleaning the teeth, how cleaning the teeth. They're not learning the deep learning. And if they don't do the deep learning, they're not going to have this whole range of cognitive, psychological advantages which can be found in those children who do go to bilingual schools. CLIL, content and language integrated learning, is, as I said, it is something that was created during the European crisis. A group of people were asked, how can we radically and fast, swiftly change these appallingly low levels of language learning? We're spending millions of bucks on teaching languages all across Europe. And what's happening? We have very, very poor results. At the same time, they were saying, also, we want to improve the learning of other subjects because actually our educational standards are not high enough. CLIL was born by an international consortium of minds who said, yes, we can do better. And what they did was they managed to produce and describe what is called a bilingual teaching approach to education. And CLIL is a dual-focused approach in which an additional language is used for the learning of both content and language. And that is what makes this difference to what is called often content-based language instruction in the United States or communicative language teaching, both of which are very good. Yes, they are, they can be, but they are not as advanced as this one, which has now become the ultimate methodology for a bilingual school. So let's now move to tomorrow. The research from the neuroscience, now the reason it's accelerating is because the equipment is becoming cheaper. And it's because aging populations in high-income societies are driving the pharmaceutical industries to further investigate how to develop medication to reduce dementia and medication to help people live longer lives in a more healthy way. So it's happening partly because of the market on pharmaceuticals, but it's also happening because there's a need. There's such a recognized and powerful need that we have to do better. Surely we have to do better, is what they were saying in Canada, it's what they were saying in Europe, it was what they were saying in Asia, and it's what people are saying now. When they think about putting their child into a certain school, they are saying, what can I afford? Surely I can do better for my child in this school, in this decision, than what I had when I was at school. Education is said to be one of the most talked about social issues, but one of the least acted on. And if, as you're watching this, you have the privilege of working in a school where you have a lot of influence, where you can make change happen, then what I'm saying to you through this set of series with Richmond Solutions is find out more. All you have to do is know where to go, but find out more, because the solutions are actually very close. The problems may not be as big as they are. They may seem huge, and I know many of the problems common to South America bilingual classes or bilingual schools, but the solutions are there primarily because other people have gone through the same experience in some other countries recently. And in terms of a radical country in Europe, in bilingual education that has worked on CLIL, Spain and Italy are the absolute leaders for you to think about. The neuroscience research shows us that emotion and cognition interact. They interact in the brain, even if the content has no emotional content, even when I'm thinking about something with no emotional content. There are two subjects in the curriculum which are very sensitive to emotion. One of those is languages, and one of those is mathematics, which is actually a language. If a child, if a student, if a young person, if an adult is carrying a kind of a dark cloud over their head, oh, in my family, we were never good at languages, or I'm the first one to be able to learn languages, then it will hinder them and it will prevent them from becoming a really profound and successful language learner. But it's not just languages where there's a change happening. The traditional education thing is KESA, K-S-A. Teach the knowledge, then hopefully the students will get some skills, and then maybe we can influence their attitudes. The new way is called ASK, and it's first of all, we have to work on the attitudes to make the kids feel good about learning languages or learning content, and then we'll focus on the skills, and then we'll develop the knowledge. So there's a big, big change happening in the world, and that change is being driven by the PISA studies, by the OECD work, which actually has finally, I think, become the best and the most articulate and the most advanced, in my personal view, in terms of meta-global research and meta-global application. And in 2025, the first PISA studies will be done on languages and on CLIL and CLIL within bilingual school environments. Now, when you look at good integrated methods, that is what the teachers do in the class. When you look at what is called, the scaffolding, for example, is an obvious one. But if you look at scaffolding, if you look at what is called conceptual dualism, if you look at translanguaging, if you look at reciprocal teaching, these are all activities that are used in quality bilingual classes. You'll see that there's a direct link to developing competencies, and there's a direct link to what I said earlier about thinking in another language. The advantages of thinking in another language do not come when you know this amount of your first language and this amount of your second language. The problem with the term bilingual is it assumes that you have 100% of one and 100% of another. The neuroscience research, one of the most exciting aspects of it is that the advantages of being in a bilingual class come in very, very fast, because you can think about something in another language, even if you have a very limited number of words or knowledge of grammar. That is where the excitement is, and that relates to the methodologies being used. And if those methodologies are EMI, if they're basically just a native speaker speaking in English for the excitement and the complexities of the students, it will not be realized. The learning mind is something that is developed through these methods, especially in terms of creative thinking, which is an issue, critical thinking, an absolutely very important global competence. The interpersonal communication, intercultural communication, we have a major hill to climb because of social media. It's not just a matter of talking to people from other countries. This is a matter of talking to anybody and communicating with anybody. And then in a world with many, many problems, the advantages of abstract thinking and basically creative thinking. These advantages are huge. And if you are interested in knowing more about the research, I will show you at the end of this presentation how to go. You can create a bilingual school with limited finance and with a small group of students and in a limited way. Or you can create a bilingual school big time by opening up a whole curriculum which is dual language. Yeah, here we learn in this language, here we learn in that language. But when you look at the methods, and it's all about methods, when you look at the methods that are used, you can see that they can be applied in many, many different ways. In Mexico, there is a very exciting work where content, that is real content, is brought into language teaching. To revolutionize language teaching in the public sector, content is drawn into language teaching. In Ireland, a country where they want to revive the first language, they are bringing in bilingual schools to strengthen the Irish language. In Finland, the bilingual schools, the bilingual classes in the schools are often focused on developing global competencies. In Brazil, there's a big emphasis on virtual reality and augmented reality in enabling students to learn in Portuguese and then have 10 minutes learning about the subject through English using AR or VR. In Australia, there are big efforts being made in bilingual classes to develop language learning, especially quite demanding languages, which are very different to English. In Italy, very much about producing students who are capable of going into academic study and so on. And I have to end with just a few very brief summary facts. What we see in terms of the history of bilingual schools and bilingual classes, and now in terms of the research, is that emotions rule. And what we see is that this relates to the emotions of our students, but also the emotions of our teachers. And the linkage between the emotions of the teachers, the emotions of the students, and the academic success and the learning success and academic success are just like that. As you well know, if you're a school principal, you know which teachers are absolute diamonds, and you know, well, maybe you need to work on helping a teacher become stronger. And you know that teaching is very demanding. One of the big global experiences shared right across the world during the last year and a half is that parents have been at home with their children, and they've realized just how demanding education can be. They've learned that, gosh, actually teaching is an art, you know? Emotions rule, emotions drive attention, and in any way, in any decisions that we make about bilingual schools, we have to bear in mind that hot and very, very fundamental issue. And boring teaching methods will not work anymore with the generation C and A that we have in our classes at the moment. Their digital exposure will not allow them to go back and learn, for example, the way I did many years ago when I was at school. The second fact is the global meta-research on quality learning. Language learning has often been in this fragmented silo, and it's been, looked at by language people who have written books about languages and so on. When you look at integration, it's bringing together mathematics teachers, science teachers, language teachers, teachers of the arts, and that is revolutionizing education. And that's one reason why collaboration between teachers, that is one reason why teaching subjects through projects in close relationship to each other is a very powerful success factor for any school, particularly a bilingual school. And then fact 3, if you look at the meta-research which we have available, you'll see that the power of teachers is absolutely phenomenal. Sometimes it is easy to forget how demanding it is to handle with dedication, with passion, with educational pedagogical expertise, a group of 20 or 30 students for an hour successfully. It is a very, very demanding job. And it is a job which is more than a job, it's like a vocation. If we take a country like Spain, it's about 65% of teachers wanted to be teachers. It was their first choice career. If you go to Finland, it's around 80%, their first choice career. But in certain countries, people become teachers by accident. They slip into it because it's a job and it's there. Those people will rarely have the vocation and the passion which is needed to realize the very best of our students. And when we're thinking about a bilingual educator, when we're thinking about a bilingual school, then we need to understand that it is actually very different to being a monolingual educator. And quite frankly, it's the future of high quality education in the world, because the advantages are just far, far too great for us to ignore. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of this session. I am speaking to you from Finland today. And as I said at the very beginning, I want to thank the Richmond team in the different countries where they're located for their support and dedication in making this so easy. And I want to thank you for having given your attention to this time. And I do hope that this has been useful for you. So wherever you are, take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Professor Marsh, for a very inspiring session. We now invite you all to go back to the auditorium for today's closing plenary.